All right. So, welcome everybody to the History of Brooks, Part One. As you may recognize, I am not at the Derry Public Library. I am at home. That is because today our HVAC system is broken. We do not have AC, and it is 96 degrees outside. And having been in the library when it didn't have air conditioning on Saturday, I can attest it's at least 10 degrees warmer inside the library than it is outside. So
Yee.
this was a good choice on the part of the DPL. But I am not presenting today. As it is Todd's birthday month, he took over and was like, "Well, who are you going to do this week? Like, you've done a lot of legends. You've done Werner Herzog. You've done David Lynch. You've done Godzilla. Who are you going to cover this time?" And the answer is Todd. Take it away.
So I looked at some of those previous entries, David Lynch, Werner Herzog, last year's primer on folk horror. I thought, let's do something a little lighter this time out. Let's do something a little more across the middle fun. And in terms of fun comedic directors, there are a few names out there that really have quite the recognition, the distinct style, and the legacy of the great Mel Brooks. And I don't remember when the idea first happened. Was like it just again from there we kind of spitballed it, and as I recall, Liz, some of your coworkers got concerned that this potentially might. I mean, the man is 99, but he's still in good health. But you know what? I'll put my money where my mouth is. If something happens to him in the next month, I will forfeit any future programs. We've got that on record now.
For background, this actually started because earlier this year I did Billy D. Williams, and one of my coworkers said, "Are you trying to kill that man?" And I said, "Billy D. Williams is doing fine." But then he brought up, "Well, you guys did David Lynch last year, and David Lynch died." And I said, "Well, David Lynch died because the man had a really extreme smoking habit and had cancer. Billy D. Williams, as far as we can tell, does not have cancer." So, but Todd, I believe you are innocent in terms of what happened to David Lynch. That was not on you or Ellie.
And I mean, even then, there was the better part of half a year between when we did that and when he passed on.
I mean, I can't blame you. I am also a little superstitious. There is one director I will not cover because I'm a little scared that I might call upon the universe. However, and you might gather who I'm talking about, his hatred for AI to the point of calling it an insult to humanity itself, I think that is going to power this man for another 10 to 15 years. I mean, this is a guy that hated the anime industry so much, he decided to come back and make another movie after retiring. So I think the
I,
hatred of AI is going to sustain him.
so I will just say before we begin, my other backup plan would have been let's pick a director who is already dead, so I can't jinx them, which would have probably been William Friedkin. We'll stick a pin in that for a future year.
Oh, joy, you get to talk about cruising.
But there's also French Connection, The Exorcist, Sorcerer. There's good stuff in there.
Right. Okay, take it away.
So let's start with the obvious first question: Who is Mel Brooks? Wait, seriously? I mean, you know what? I mean, we're gonna go to that regardless, but again, chances are you have seen at least one of his films. The man has made some of the most well-regarded comedy movies of the past 50 years: Blazing Saddles, Young Frankenstein, The Producers, Spaceballs. I mean, granted, we'll be touching on that a little more when we get there, but I digress. The man is an EGOT and for anyone who's not familiar with that term, it's one of the people who has won an Emmy, a Grammy, an Oscar, and a Tony. To break down, he won his Emmy for back. It's like way back when he was doing for writing a reunion show for Sid Caesar and the people on your show of shows. He won on his Grammy for reteaming with Carl Reiner to do a sequel to their 2,000-year-old man routine in the year 2000. He's actually won two Oscars. One is for an animated short film called The Critic, and his Best Original Screenplay Oscar for The Producers. And stick a pin in that title because his Tony is for the musical The Producers, which he still holds the record for the most wins on. And again, it's like, so we'll be going from there. And sorry. Well, that's like, as you're seeing right off the bat, he was not born Mel Brooks. He was born Melvin Kaminsky. It's like, at the risk of a awkward to put it, the classic arc. It's like hearing him describe his childhood in his memoirs reads like it's the archetypal young Jewish boy growing up in New York or in the 20s. It's honestly very charming. But yes, he'd been interested in an entertainer for it's like going back to that childhood. He had a lot of fond memories of going to the movies, going to see stage musicals because again, he was in New York. He was right in the middle of all this. And he had a very supportive family that was happy to like he had relatives who were willing to take him to shows. He had brothers who were willing to kind of help keep the family going. He had a very supportive network. There's actually one line from where he talks about I'm gonna pull up the line here. It's him regarding the idea of comedians always coming from troubled backgrounds. So when I'm asked why did you become a comedian, there is no way to psychologically explain and say it's this or that. A lot of people think that comedy and getting laughs and applause is making for an unhappy childhood. Au contraire, I think it's just the opposite. All I can say is that in my case, comedy is keeping the joy of a happy childhood going strong. I definitely want to continue with the love that I got from my mother, brothers, and aunts and uncles. Laughter is a concrete response to your actions, a way to let you know that people respond to your efforts. You get the spotlight when you're the baby of the family. Somewhere around 16 or 17, you don't get that anymore. I wasn't getting kissed for just being Melvin. Now I had to go out in earnest. I need to be kissed by somebody. So I sought the spotlight. And so he actually got his first in with it's like because they actually they lived near the actor Don Appel, who is again more of a stage actor, but they got it in working for him. He actually got them a gig at a club he ran in Catskills, which actually led to Brooks' first real foray into comedy. I will say, these excerpts I'm reading are actually from his autobiography, which is a fun read if you get the chance. There was one night where they were doing a show and they had an actor that basically had a sprained ankle. He could not actually perform that moment. They needed a warm body and replace him. And the role in question, it was an old man. Bearing in mind this happens, Mel Brooks was only 14 years old. And I'm going to go from where he puts it. When they saw me, the social director said, "He's just a kid. He's much too young looking to be the district attorney." I immediately sprang forth with the lines that I quickly mastered. There, I said. "Harry, have a seat. Here, have a glass of water, and tell me in your own words what exactly happened on the night of February the 15th. Social director said, "He knows the lines. Good enough. Make him old." So they gave me a white wig, a goatee, painted many lines on my face, and shoved a rolled up towel on my back to make me look old and hunched over. I said, "Do we really need a towel? I'm playing a district attorney, not Quasimodo." "Shut up," they replied. So there I was, 8 o'clock. I'd be making a debut as an actor in front of a live audience. I made my way on the stage, sat behind the district attorney's desk. The curtain went up. Uncle Harry entered. There, Harry. Have a seat," I said, trembling with fear as I sallied forth. "Here," I said. "Have a glass of water. Tell me in your own words what happened on the night of February the 15th. Unfortunately, I poured a little too much water in the glass. It slipped out of my hand and crashed into 1,000 pieces in the silver platter on the desk below. A huge gasp, followed by stunned silence, filled the auditorium. Everybody was paralyzed. Nobody moved. Harry didn't move. I didn't move. The audience didn't move. The band was frozen. I didn't know what to do. So I decided to spill the beans. I walked straight down to the footlights, took on my wig and goatee, and said, "Sorry, folks. I'm only 14. I've never done this before." The audience burst out laughing. Again, it was a story I just had to pass along. Just again, in terms of you find your comedy bug, that's a very Mel Brooks way to have it happen. And since I made the note that the Brooks alias was actually, as he tells it, yeah, that was when he figured out early on as a stage name because he kind of realized Kaminsky's not really a big entertainer name. His original plan was going to be to take his mother's surname of Brookford, but at the time he was looking at a potential career in music at that point, and he realized as he saw himself as the drummer and realized you can't fit Brookford onto a set of drums. It's too much wordage. Chopped off the last part, shortened it down to Brooks, and the name that would mark almost as like the better part of a century of his life was born. So, and of course, as you can see this last part, as he got a little older, the world being what it was, he got drafted for World War II, served as a combat engineer. Overall, it's like his was an interesting time there. It wasn't necessarily like it would say it was a great time, but he came back alive, not really traumatized all in one piece, which serving active combat, that's kind of the best you could hope for. Again, this one where his memoirs go into a lot more detail on that. Well worth the read if you get the
I would
chance.
say like it's almost like the opposite of what happened to Rod Serling.
Well, I mean, Brooks' case, he was serving the engineering corps, so I don't they didn't necessarily see like the same degree of combat.
Mhm.
We got back, and so there was as like started finding any more of his niche television. It's like he started finding more of niche in entertainment, and specifically, he got his work in television. His it's like his big breakout being writing for Sid Caesar on Your Show of Shows, which this leads to probably one of the most infamous pieces of Mel Brooks lore. He was very good friends with Sid Caesar. Sid Caesar also, unfortunately, he was a man who had a legendary temper. And there's a story he has been asked about in numerous interviews, and he has corroborated. There was once a time Sid Caesar held him by his feet out of a window. Actually, the one time I ever got to see Mel Brooks live in person ever, that was the first question somebody asked him, and he was very matter of factly, "Yes, it happened," and he proceeded to tell exactly what happened. Looked at it in hindsight, he was clearly looking at it from a place of affection. It was yeah, Sid was a wonderful friend. Sid has his demons. But anyway, he is like that was it's like the show was a success. He made a lot of connections there, made a lot of friends, and eventually this led to him getting to pitch his own idea for a show, which some of you may recognize, Get Smart. One of those shows which this was actually I was like, and actually this kind of had a similar issue to the subsequent show we'll be discussing. It was they had this great idea, they had a lot of ambition behind it, but it was also a show where Mel already had ambitions that were a little too big for television with this. They actually, some of this was almost produced on a movie type scale, and they couldn't quite keep that up, even though the reviews were good. Which kind of issue with Get Smart was like the network liked it, it got well reviewed, but it just didn't get picked up for another season. It really blew up in their face it really blew up in his face in the 70s when they did their TV series When Things Were Rotten, which was his not as well remembered riff on doing a Robin Hood type of thing. Again, to hear him tell it, they produced this on the level of a movie. They shot this to look like a movie. They went to the budget of a movie, and basically it became a case of the network deciding this show is too expensive. We can't keep doing this. So suffice to say, he has always been an ambitious man, in a very good way, though. And among the friends, it's like while working with Sid Caesar again, he made several comedic friends. Probably one of the most famous friendships to come out of this was his collaborations with Carl Reiner. And probably their single most famous creation was the 2,000-Year-Old Man. The entire upshot of this was this kind of started as them just spitballing an idea around. The entire joke is Reiner would be the interviewer, and Mel would play this figure who is, as the concept goes, title suggests he is this man who has been alive for 2,000 years. And the entire idea was they wouldn't necessarily like pre-write this. Reiner would tee up the questions and just kind of let Brooks go off with, okay, here's the example. Hey, here's what you're going to. It's like, here's the question. Do what you will with it. And credit where it's due. I have looked up some of the clips of this. Playing the straight man, Reiner has an amazing sense of self-restraint for some of the stuff he can keep. He can keep from not breaking during. I had debated including a soundbite of it, but I wasn't sure how closely litigated those were for copyright. If you're really curious, you can find several of them, several clips that are going around YouTube, including there was an animated special made out of this. It's their original audio. They just had animators go and like put visuals to it. If nothing else, I would say look up their riff on Robin Hood. That is a good kind of quick sample of what these jokes were like. Uh, Again, part of me also wants to start quoting, but it's like it's not going to be the same thing. I know that, you know that. But yes, by all means, seek these out. I wouldn't be surprised if maybe the Library Network might actually have the album printings of these, either the original or the year 2000 version. But as one where I figured if we're going to be talking about his pre-movie comedy, if there's any one singular piece that had to be highlighted, this was the one. During this time, of course, Mel met one of the other great collaborators of his life, and this is probably one of these. As like I will say, also this is one of the sweetest love stories I have encountered in reading up on filmmakers. Mel met Anne Bancroft while they were doing a rehearsal for a Perry Como show. To hear him tell it, he was automatically smitten with her. Actually, I'm once for what I promised with you last time, I'm going to use his words on this one. After Buddy got the key for their song, he said, "Let's go back to my place." And I said, "Forget it. I think I'm in love." I went backstage to see Anne. We started talking and we never stopped. I asked her, "What are you doing after this? Let's go out for coffee." She said, "I'm sorry, I have an appointment. I have to see my agent Bernie Seligman at the William Morris office." I said, "Bernie Seligman? I have to see him too. I promised to get back to him 2 weeks ago." That was the beginning of a string of lies that I never stopped telling just to be wherever she was. I said, "Let's share a cab." When he hit the street, I whistled for a taxi. She was really impressed with my whistle. She said, "That's the best taxi whistle I've ever heard." True or not, it struck a chord. That's February 5th, 1961, a date I'll never forget. Every night that week, I checked on where she would be. I found out who her friends were and I called them. For some reason, they trusted me and actually told me her whereabouts. I'd show up at a restaurant where she was at, or a nightclub, or I'd even wangle my way into a big party. If she was going to be there. By the end of the week, I said to her, "It's amazing. We're all showing up at the same places. It's kismet." She laughed and shouted back, "It's not kismet. You're stalking me. If you want to see me, why don't you be brave and ask me for a date?" So I did. She said yes, and I saw her almost every night. And what followed became they were married. They had multiple kids. One of which, I mean, again, if you've been to the library, you've probably seen the works of their son Max Brooks on the shelves. The man behind World War Z, he and the Zombie Survival Guide. And again,
Oh,
they were married.
also the book Devolution.
Oh yes, oh god, that's right. I forgot that. But anyway, the two of them had been married for over 40 years before she finally, before her, or she passed in 2005. Let me double check the year on that really quick.
Also,
And
just to go back to Max Brooks quickly, the movie World War Z has nothing to do with Max Brooks's book. Just read the book.
yeah, that was a bit of a controversy when that came out.
But I
Okay.
do. One of the things I remember reading was anyone asked like, "Are you ever going to date after Anne Bancroft?" And he or
That was
after
actually the quote I was
Bancroft.
about to find.
Okay, I'll let you do it.
So he was asking 2023 about basically if he was ever going to see anyone after Anne's death. He was quoted as saying, "Once you're married to Anne Bancroft, others don't seem to be appealing." So it is safe to say he's probably still in love with her to this day. And part of the reason I put her at this particular point in time, besides the fact that roughly this point in time they first got married, she was very much a creative influence in his life. She is actually the one who encouraged him to take up directing, to songwrite. She was always the one going, "Mel, you don't need to look to other people for this. You have the skills. You can do this." Which is actually where it's worth saying Anne Bancroft takes a partial credit for what came next. Because she was literally it's like number one, it's like she was the one who encouraged him to direct it, and she was very much the one who encouraged him, "Write the music. You don't need to hire somebody else to do this." Which means, yes, she takes a partial credit for the wonderfully insane little ditty "Springtime for Hitler." And as pointed out, that first thing, yes, Brooks actually technically got his first inspiration for this movie years earlier when he was working for the stage producer Benjamin Kutcher, who he basically describes as the closest thing to a real life Max Bialystock. This is a guy who was very regularly kind of in the red. He had a lot. It's like he frequently had shows that did not do well, and he did note that sometimes, yes, he would raise up more than he needed, which meant there was some money left on the table. This, of course, leading to the famous central thesis of this movie. With the right bad show, a producer could make more money producing a flop than a hit. Obviously, Kutcher never went to the borderline criminal extent that it's carried out in this movie, but that's probably for the best because then I don't think you'd actually be able to make a real life movie out of that easily. And this is also worth highlighting both for this and for all the subsequent entries. There is always the classic question of, as far as like people look at comedy and going, "It's gotten too soft, you can't do these kinds of things nowadays." A topic we will again be coming back to. I will point out when this movie first came out, there was question of should you be doing this. Brooks actually did get some pushback on, is it okay to be making comedy about Nazis? Is it okay to be making light of Adolf Hitler? And of course, he dug his heels in, and one of those notes there, yes, he did want to call the show "Springtime for Hitler." He actually wanted to call the movie that, and the studio, they put their foot down like, we can't sell a movie by this name. You're going to need to give it another title. Which, I mean, the producer still works well as a title on that one.
Also, I now do love knowing that Mel Brooks lived to see the film Inglourious Bastards.
Which also, this does bring up one of the other great recurring trends of Mel Brooks' career is there are some who would say the greatest revenge in life is living well. And while on the one hand, yes, Mel Brooks has done that, he also preferred one of the other great forms of revenge, thumbing his nose at Hitler even in the grave. Mockery of that man has become a recurring theme throughout his work, but few times ever quite as spectacularly as with this movie. Which overall, it's like critically, it was overall well received. There were a few people who were again kind of questioned the tastefulness of it, but it was well liked, and for the limited release it had, it was decently successful. And of course, it got Brooks' second Oscar, so there is that. And we'll be coming back to this because again, this this kind of becomes like the wonderful bookends of his career. This is like so. I'll be the first to admit this program was the first time I ever actually watched The 12 Shares. It's actually not a bad little movie. It's probably the first and only time you'll see Mel Brooks doing a overall straight adaptation of something. This isn't him necessarily riffing. This was he found this Russian adventure novel and kind of went like, there's something here. I can work with this. As he put it, there's an engine to this story. For anybody who's not familiar with the story, it concerns a Russian noble after the revolution who he receives a confession. It's like he's talking to his mother. She gives him a deathbed confession that she basically hid the family's wealth, specifically their jewels, in one of 12 chairs that were seized by the state. He's now working as like a lowly bureaucrat, so he sees this as like, if I can reclaim these, I can get my ticket out of here. He winds up so he winds up pairing up with this kind of is like this con man figure who he first is ready to like it's like he finds out about by accident, and it turns into you can make me part of this whole adventure, or I can turn you in. What's it gonna be? These two kind of become up in an unlikely friendship where they're then also paired against a crooked priest played by Dom DeLuise, who also found out about this from the deathbed confession and decides, I'm going to forego my vows. I'm going to get me those jewels. Which, as Brooks goes, again, it's got some good laughs. It's got a nice little momentum to it. If you're seeing it for nothing else, see it for, again, Dom DeLuise is an absolute hoot as the movie's villain. It's it's him trying something different. I think so it overall works. It's honestly one of the ones where he gets a good emotional core, which much as I love the man, his films don't always land at, but this one's on plays it off well. This isn't the network, so I would say if you're curious, you've never seen it, it's a nice little surprise. And now we come to one of the biggies. We are back on the genre riffs, my friends, with probably one of two of the most famous riffs he does. These are going to be back to back. This is actually okay. So technically, this would be considered an adaptation per se, but this is more of a case of somebody else had written the script for the loose idea of this. The very basic idea of okay, black man gets picked to be the sheriff for this little western town. And when they first approached Brooks for it, he was kind of skeptical. He felt a little weird about the idea of should I be? It's like, how do I feel about using somebody else's work like this? Sat down, read through the script, and went like, okay, there's a potential here. There is a good idea here. And he agreed to it on the terms that he wanted to work with the other writer on this. That the original writer's like, I want to see what we can workshop together. The original script was not quite as openly parodying it. There was nothing like the weird fourth wall breaking finale. There wasn't things like that. I'm trying to think of another good example. There wasn't the Count Basie cameo. It was played more straight, just kind of lightly tweaking some of the Western tropes. And this is another movie that also marks what becomes a recurring theme in Brooks's career, per that second note. There's the cast that he wants, and there's the cast that he gets. And actually, I should be fair. There was a earlier case of this with the producers, and I'm bringing this up just because it's a fascinating piece of trivia. So he had his two leads for that movie, Zero Mostel and Gene Wilder. They were all set as they had cast as their actor for the role of Franz Liebkind, the, for lack of a nicer way to put it, Nazi writer of Springtime for Hitler. They've got him cast. They're getting ready to go into production. Suddenly, Brooks gets a visit one night from this actor, and he's like, "I really want to work on this movie with you. I am very excited to work on this movie, but I just got a chance to do an audition for Mike Nichols, and this could be a really big moment for my career. I don't want to just cut and run you, but I don't think I can turn this down." Brooks, being magnanimous as he was, like, you know what? It's fine. Go in for the audition. It can't hurt. Deep down, I figured this guy probably isn't gonna get cast, so what have I got to lose? In that moment, Mel Brooks encouraged Dustin Hoffman to go audition for The Graduates. There was a world where Dustin Hoffman was almost in the producers. In this case, the both the leads were actually recasts. As we mentioned here, they initially had hoped to get Richard Pryor to play hired to play the role of Bart. This is actually going to be one of two times Richard Pryor was going to be in a Mel Brooks movie, and something kept him from doing it. The studios couldn't insure him, so they cast around. They got Cleavon Little, who I am honestly saddened this man never had a bigger career because you watch him in this movie, he has a perfect leading man energy for this job. He gets the tone, he gets the pitch. He is a perfect. He has the. I think probably the most perfect moments of this. It's the Candy Graham scene where he gets the Bugs Bunny style energy this role has going for it. The other big stand, the other in this case being also featured here, Gene Wilder was a last minute addition to this. The role of the Waco Kid, Mel Brooks initially envisioned it as he wanted an aging. It's like his two terms were he either wanted an aging Western actor, an aging alcoholic, or as he would call it, an alkie, or both. He first approached John Wayne. John Wayne read the script. He thought it was funny, but he thought this was just a little too blue for what he could get away with, which, if you ever read some John Wayne interviews, that's kind of saying something, but I digress. After Wayne turned it down, Mel Brooks looked to actor Gig Young. Gig Young was game. He signed up. His first day on set, Gig Young was, to put it politely, incredibly drunk. They were doing the scene where they're doing actually the Waco Kid's first scene. If you've never seen the movie, it's a moment where Bart goes into the drunk tank lockup. The Waco Kid is upside down in the bed. Are we awake? Well, that all depends. Are we black? Yes. Then we're awake, but very confused. Gig Young got as far as, not sure. Are we black? And then it all came out. He was not in any shape to film after that. Gene Wilder tagged in. And honestly, for not being at all what Brooks saw for the part, number one, he plays off of Cleavon Little perfectly. And number two, he gets the tone of the movie very, very well. And again, this also had several other. This marked the beginning of several other collaborators who had followed throughout Brooks's career. Madeline Kahn, who got herself a Best Supporting Actress nomination for this. Harvey Korman. Brooks himself actually making probably his biggest. He had small parts in the earlier two films. Like he had a voiceover role in The Producers. He had a small role in The 12 Chairs. Here he has his biggest role to date as the lecherous, dumb as a fence post Governor William J. Lepetamain. And again, this marks kind of the beginning of what we consider the Mel Brooks stable of players. And also, this marks Mel Brooks' first honest to God hit. As he tells it, like, the producers did decently at the box office. The 12 Chairs did decently, but neither was a big hit. This was huge. This put his name on the map. This was to borrow a line from the podcast Blank Check, this was his guarantor. This was the one that showed he could deliver. And it's also one of the ones that's most talked about today, leading to one of the biggest questions about it. There's been a lot of controversy over Blazing Saddles in recent years. I will start by saying, again, if you haven't seen this before and you're curious, be warned. This is probably one of Mel Brooks' most openly crass movies. It is also one of his most incredibly funny movies, but it has earned that R rating. One of the reasons for that is this movie goes a lot. This goes to a lot of racial humor, and there are some rather pointed slurs that get used at points. Now, to hear some people talk about it now, there's the question of could you make this movie nowadays? And no, you couldn't, but there's a few reasons for that. The first is you couldn't make this movie now simply because this was very much a movie about film at the time. This was his this is his very loving but very barbed jab at the Western genre of the time. There's a lot of jokes specifically that are about that era of film. Like Brooks has a secondary role as an Indian in red face because that was a common practice at the time. There's of course the great joke in the movie where they're trying to rally the townsfolk and they get them all going by pointing out, you do this for Randolph Scott? At which point the man's name is spoken of in almost heavenly praise. But again, they don't make movies like this nowadays. You could not do the big finale of this movie where it is a full-blown fist fight that carries across several studio sound stages, a studio commissary, and finally to Grauman's Chinese theater. It's just not how movies are made anymore.
Mhm.
And as far as to the point about the racial humor, well, that's one where Brooks will agree you probably couldn't do it nowadays, but he defends it not for the sake of just shock value because he never saw this as just shock value. He defends the use of the slur in that movie because, as he kind of puts it, it's there to kind of it's there because this is a film also about race and racial relations. He uses it because it's an ugly word to kind of reflect the ultimately bigoted attitudes the characters use it. The people of Rock Ridge, that is like it's like Hedley Lamar's gang. They're all meant to be seen as either outright evil or just incredibly ignorant characters. The use of this word is not meant to be something they're rewarded for. They are either seen as jerks or the famous line, morons. So it's one where, yeah, it has been a question that's batted back and forth. I think a lot of people misunderstand that. Yes, that's a component of this movie, but it's not just there to be subversive for subversive's sake. At the time, honestly, probably one of their biggest. Well, yes, there was questions about the racial humor. One of the biggest shocks they got pushed back from the studio on had nothing to do with that, and everything to do with what's now seen as an incredibly tame scene involving a bunch of cowboys sitting around a campfire eating beans and drinking black coffee, which Brooks saw as biology doing what it would do if this wasn't a movie. He got a lot of pushback on that one at the time, and that's kind of weird to think about nowadays. Sorry, Liz, look here by say something there.
Well, I was actually going to say when people go like, "Oh, you couldn't make this movie nowadays," it's also I think just the very practical reason of the Western is not really a
That too.
thing. I mean, in the 50s and 60s, like Westerns were a very big genre. They were almost akin to like the superhero movies we have now. That's just not really, but so like if you were to make a Blazing Saddles style movie nowadays, it'd be like, why? Now, if you
Like,
were to make a Blazing Saddles movie kind of about a superhero movie, it'd make a little more sense. But I do think there has been um an heir to the Blazing Saddles throne, and help me, I finally realized this movie is almost 20 years old, but it came out in 2008 and it was called Tropic Thunder. And I mean, they're a movie that, has some of a similar thing where there is some shock value, but even then it's not shock value for shock value's sake. Like the character, like let's just say Robert Downey Jr.'s characters and actions are not there to make fun of people. It is not there to make fun of blackface or black people. It is there to make fun of the practice of whitewashing, which is even as late as the aughts, pretty prevalent in Hollywood, and also to make fun of method acting.
I
And it
mean,
pulls it off pretty well.
the entire central joke of that movie is what these people wanted to be taken seriously as
Yeah.
actors.
But like Blazing Saddles is not just it's a spoof of a genre and of filmmaking, and Tropic Thunder does that as well. So it's like you could make it today. It would just look very different. And I've said the same about the film Airplane. You could
Yeah.
do Airplane again. It's just not going to look like Airplane did in
Yeah.
1980.
And again, this is also one of those things which kind of this movie marks the beginning of Brooks doing his much more overt riffs because like obviously the producers in the 12 Cheers they're more comedic narratives, but this is where it turns into it's him openly taking him taking something which in a lot of his best examples is a genre he loves and going, how can I tweak this? How can I have fun with this? How can I basically comedically explode this thing? And again, this is still arguably his best example of this, although his follow-up is equally well regarded. And this is actually one that was born out of working on Blazing Saddles. One day he looked over and saw Gene Wilder jotting down notes in a notebook. And looked over, top of the page Wilder was working on, just two words, Young Frankenstein. And they kind of started talking, it's like, there's something here. They kind of started, over the course of filming, they started kind of extrapolating this idea. They're like, okay, how do we build on this? And much like Blazing Saddles is kind of Mel Brooks' very lovingly kind of ribbing on the Western genre, this is them kind of playing with the classic Frankenstein movies, very specifically the two James Whale movies. Obviously the original 1931 Frankenstein and The Bride of Frankenstein. And again, is very much coming out of a place of love. And one of the cool pieces of trivia that comes with that is they were actually able to get some of the old laboratory props from the James Whale production. They managed to find somebody who had kept them, they restored them, and they got the okay to bring them back and use them on the set. And funny enough, after the litany of questions they had about some of the subject matter of Blazing Saddles, their biggest concern here was when the studios found out we want to film this in black and white. The initial response they got, the first studio they approached was like, "No, we're not doing this. If you're filming this, you're filming it in color." They fought as they wound up going to 20th Century Fox. Alan Ladd was willing to take the chance on it, but even then, he tried to convince them like, "How about we film this in color and then we can put like a filter over it, something like that." Brooks Duggan is like, no, we're expressly filming this in black and white. It's not going to look right if we do this as a color and just filter it over. And I do need to point, actually, given the particular screenshot, in terms of things that got fought for, the put on the Ritz scene is actually Gene Wilder's victory on this one. Because initially, when the idea got pitched, Brooks thought this is just too far. It's not going to work. And Gene Wilder really wanted to do this. Eventually, kind of like, okay, Mel, I'll tell you what. Let's film the scene. We do it one time, see how it looks. If we like it, we keep it in. If you don't, I won't say any more about it. We can drop it here and now. They filmed it. Brooks looked at it. He's like, okay, you win, Gene. This is perfect. We're keeping it in. And as a result, it became probably one of the most famous scenes in the whole movie. And likewise with Blazing Saddles before this became a big hit. 74 is arguably one of Mel Brooks' biggest years because two solid hits back to back. And by this point, yeah, he was. This was like he was now established. This was a guy you could count on to get on, and he was happy to run with that. So after it's like this kind of becomes a running joke for him for a little while. Like after this, he went, okay, I took away color. What do I want to do next? And the idea first literally just came up as, yeah, Ron Carey. It's like his friend Ron Carey kept doing, what if we make a silent movie? And at first, they were trying to figure out what's the angle here. Funny enough, the studio pushback actually kind of gave it to them because the entire central element of the movie is it's a filmmaker who decides he wants to try and make a silent movie in the 1970s. And there's a through line specifically about the idea of it's studio art versus commerce. Like the villains of the movie are literally a banking group that is trying to buy out the studio. But yeah, it plays to a lot of the kind of sillier, over the top silent movie tropes, but they also take advantage of the fact that by this point Brooks has the connections. He can get a lot of big names in the cast. Besides just his three leads, himself, Dom DeLuise, and Marty Feldman, they have a supporting cast including people like Burt Reynolds, James Caan, Paul Newman, Anne Bancroft, Bernadette Peters. It is arguably one of his most star-studded casts. And credit where it's due, everyone is game for it. The bare minimum, the Burt Reynolds scene is worth watching because he is number one. He's willing to completely make fun of himself by they play and present him as like this. Again, it's a very self-absorbed narcissistic figure, and Burt is entirely in for the joke. I will say it's like this isn't quite as strong as the previous two entries, and reviews at the time kind of said the same thing. Like there are good bits in here, but it's not as tightly put together. There's definitely some jokes that kind of land a little eh. And there I will say, watched in light of 2025, there's a couple of jokes which are yeah, they don't age as well. There is a running joke involving two ladies who keep coming across these guys in let's call them, they could look like wrong situations out of context, and their response is definitely one you could not put in a movie anymore. So yeah, that doesn't tend to get brought up so much, but overall, I mean, there are still a lot of fun elements to look for in this movie. Just, I mean, I will say this, strictly speaking, there is no Mel Brooks movie I would say is unwatchable. There are ones that you definitely go like, you could do better. This is, I'd still say, kind of upper end. If nothing else, the ambition is there, and I need to say the quote up top here is, it's one of the only actually like audible spoken lines of dialogue in the movie, and it is arguably the funniest joke in the whole film. If you're not checked it out yet, I would recommend doing so just for the context on that one. I debated actually putting who says it, but I didn't want to spoil the punchline. This was another which I had actually not seen before this program, and I'm kind of kicking myself for it because this was kind of a fun one, and this was the tail end of his joke after silent movie of, I promise, next time I'm not gonna try and like take something out of the film. We're actually going back to making a straight up movie. And this time, it's like this time going instead of just the stylistic tweak, he went back to a genre riff, that of the late great Alfred Hitchcock. And this was one of the ones he was. This is one of two where he was kind of nervous about. I'm about to riff on this great filmmaker. I kind of feel like I need their blessing. So he approached Alfred Hitchcock on this one, incredibly nervous, which, considering it's split his career, that's saying something because this is Mel Brooks still at the top of his game, on top of the world, and he's the one who's going hat in hand to a guy like Hitchcock going, "Is it okay if we kind of make fun of your movies?" To his relief, Hitchcock was entirely on board with it. He even actually they discussed ideas for it. They actually kind of batted around a few. Hitchcock even suggested a couple jokes. Admittedly, not all of them made it in, but he talks about one which on paper, it's a funny joke. It's just one that couldn't make it into the finished film because there wasn't really a scene for it. And again, this as a first time watch, this is a pretty enjoyable one. It's again, he gets back to having some of the Brooks regulars in there. You've got Harvey Korman is back, Cloris Leachman is back in there. What? God, why am I blanking on the name? It's Madeline Kahn's back. Dick Van Patten makes an appearance. Was Dick Van Patten? I think it was Dick Van Patten. I apologize. I was on the top of my head. Anyway, this is also one where instead of trying to do like a we're going to do like a silent film or black and white, he kind of part of the affection here is he is playing off of some of the great Hitchcock stylistic techniques. Like one great recurring joke is he plays the idea of the camera almost acting like its own separate character in the scenes. Like there's one when it's approaching people sitting down to a dinner. The cameraman breaks through a glass window and just instead of just being this third person omniscient, everybody looks over like, "Was that?" Again, this is another I'm pretty sure is in the network, but I would double check to be sure. This was well received, and to Brooks' relief more than anyone, Hitchcock loved it and actually sent him a very personalized thank you letter with a bottle of wine. So this wasn't just him being very like, yeah, it's fine. It's he genuinely, sincerely liked the effort. This is kind of where I'd say the film starts to take a turning point for a different reason. So, we're gonna take some water here. Following the kind of the tight riff of doing a very specifically Alfred Hitchcock, one thing that kind of came out of that was he started realizing he could get away with more in terms of what he could actually film, like effects shots, that kind of thing, which led him to decide he wanted to do a riff on like again big historical epics, which plays out in a lot of how this movie goes. Like you have a Dawn of Man sequence, you have like a Roman time sequence, you have a brief nod to like biblical epics, and you culminate in a French Revolution riff. And of course, there's the Spanish Inquisition, which is probably if this scene is remembered for anything, it is that moment, which is an over the top musical send up of probably one of the most notorious periods of religious persecution in history. This and the title for the record, yeah, they did not initially intend to follow up on this. It was a joking reference to a book called The History of the World by Walter Raleigh that he was apparently imprisoned and died before he ever got to complete it, hence the part one. this is a movie where I'm of two minds on it. There's a lot of genuinely very funny bits in it. There's a lot of great casting, but this is also kind of the movies start to kind of lose a little bit of their focus here. Like there's a bit of a through line, but this becomes a lot more miscellaneous sketches. Liz, refresh memory, was it Drew McQueen who kind of said the movies have to start to become like giant Mad Magazine articles?
I believe he was referencing more Spaceballs, but he did say yes, this was the turning point. Also, I do want to point out there was a sequel made to this. It came
Yes,
out
just
during the
recently
pandemic.
it's like, and he did write for The History of the World Part 2, which is a series on Hulu. I will admit I have not checked that out yet. For the most part, I tried to focus purely on the directorial efforts, but
Yeah.
I'd heard overall decent things. Not amazing, but decent.
From what I heard, it's a very worthy follow up, but I've just kind of put it as like, I mean, for me, this is kind of where I kind of fall off Mel Brooks. I am not the biggest fan of Spaceballs. I do think Robin Hood Men in Tights is funny, but yeah, this is kind of the last Mel Brooks movie for me.
Yeah, like again, there's moments and other stuff, but it's like, again, to use his own words, he feels like his best movies have an engine to them. It's again, it's the central thesis that kind of drives them. In the producers, it's kind of the unlikely friendship forms between Max and Leo. The 12 Chairs is kind of that similar idea of these two unlikely companions going on this adventure. Blazing Saddles, it is this again, it's him kind of thumbing his nose at like racism will also again, this loving look at the Western. Young Frankenstein, it's the idea of Frederick Frankenstein kind of redeeming the family name. Silent movie, again, it's the idea of these three kind of scrappy filmmakers trying to save a studio. And High Anxiety, it's Brooks is playing this Hitchcock lead who is trying to solve a mystery, avoid a murder, and clear his own name. Here, there isn't really quite a clear through line. Like you start to get one with the Roman Empire where it's Brooks playing this guy called Comicus, who's like the quote unquote stand-up philosopher. But after the scene featured here, The Last Supper, it jumps out of the French Revolution and it turns to a whole different set of characters. It's again, it feels more like a vignette movie rather than like a really thought through line. And this is also where the reception starts to get a little more mixed. Its reviews are a little less favorable, and people still show up, but they're no longer like runaway hits. And then comes Spaceballs. This marks the second time in Mel Brooks' career where he's going, I've got to figure out how to. It's like I want to get do this, but I also kind of don't want to seem like I'm stepping on a filmmaker's toes. So he went to George Lucas about I kind of want to make fun of on a Star Wars here. Would you be okay with that? Funny enough, it's like he sent the script to Lucas, and funny enough, Lucas had only really one condition: no action figures. He was okay with a lot of the merchandise stuff, but for anybody who doesn't know or remember, Lucas, what part of Lucas's secret to success was he got the merchandising rights to Star Wars, so he kind of saw this as a "don't go stepping into my backyard" moment. For Brooks, who, as I understand it, it didn't sound like he ever planned to do action figures in the first place. It was kind of a done, no problem. And I'm kind of in the same boat with as Liz on this one, where there's a lot of genuinely very funny moments in this, but again, it's a movie that really feels like it loses. It's like there, even though he kind of has a central story, he's loosely basing it off of because he's admitted he kind of took the core idea was doing this sci-fi version of It Happened One Night, but even then, it doesn't really carry it the way it is a solid structure. It's more just that explains the Bill Pullman Daphne Zuniga angle, but otherwise, a lot of the rest of the movie is just kind of bits. And again, that becomes the problem for a lot of later Mel Brooks is each thing is like it's a little sketch that all they kind of hold together, but you don't really feel like you're getting a clear, solid narrative anymore. You're just kind of hopping from one scene to the next.
Well, and that kind of goes back to the it's a Mad Magazine,
Yeah.
a live action. Which I mean, there's nothing wrong with Mad Magazine. I grew up on Mad Magazine. But if you do read a Mad Magazine parody, yes, there's the through. They already have the through line because they're making fun of a movie, but it really is just a one or a two panel joke.
And I will say this much
From the
though, the reviews on this were likewise a little shaky, but this was a hit. And I mean, this is still for a lot of people, this is their Mel Brooks gateway drug. This is still up there, like it's one of his more popular ones, even if it's not necessarily considered like his best. It's got a following, so much so that they tried to a less. a much less well-received spin-off TV series, and now they're trying to make a sequel. Whatever happens to that, jury remains to be seen. One thing I will give it, since I already put the screenshot up there, Rick Moranis is genuinely one of the highlights of that movie. Granted, that's Rick Moranis in general, but I digress.
Also, this will probably be better received than most of the new Star Wars stuff.
I don't know, nostalgia is still one hell of a drug.
Eh. Oh no, I'm talking about people hate a lot of the new Star Wars stuff. They'll probably love the new Spaceballs.
Again, I'm gonna point out, nostalgia is still one hell of a drug.
That's fair.
I mean, again, I'll also remind you, like I said, that Spaceball spin-off series was hated.
That's true. Also, we are at about 7:30, so
Well, we are coming to the back half,
yeah.
so this is probably one of the other standouts that if I'm going to really dig in, I need to point out because this is another I had not seen before this program, and this is kind of in the back half. This is the one time he kind of tried to get away from the genre riff, and I get what he's trying to go for because the entire story, it's Mel Brooks plays this rich guy who gets to a bet with a colleague with the idea of could you last 30 days with a homeless person. And I see what Brooks is going for in the film. He's trying to do this because he's trying to make this as sort of a look at this is how we treat the poorest of us. Where do we get off? And there's honestly a couple moments in there where he gets the genuine emotional core of that. There is some real pathos in certain scenes. The problem is the finished movie is like tonally, it is all over the place. Like again, there's a moment there where like this scene here is like it's kind of the tail end of one of the people he kind of befriends out on the streets dies, and it's a genuinely sad scene in that moment. Then this movie culminates in what can be basically described as two people fighting and hiding with backhoes. This movie just really doesn't seem to know quite where it's going, and I feel bad because you feel like Brooks's heart is in it, but he kind of can't control his better instincts. The end result is this movie is generally regarded as probably one of the biggest misses of his career. It's got a little bit of following, but it's generally regarded as it was a critical failure, it was a box office failure. He's still kind of got a soft spot for it, but this isn't one you tend to see that many people defending anymore. I would say maybe look into it as like it's a curious piece of him trying something different. Just don't go in with high expectations. There are elements of it just I wouldn't say like beat down the door to watch it. Post Spaceballs, this is probably the biggest high that his cinematic career has. I can't call it his career in general because we'll touch on that. But yeah, this was him returning to to his first time going back to Robin Hood since the 1970s. And yeah, again, this is still kind of regarded as like one of his better ones. There's still a couple like a lot of films. There's a couple of jokes which yeah, they kind of creak with their age a little bit, but it's not like it's a again, it's not an unwatchable movie for it. The cast does deliver a lot of goodwill. Carrie Elways is game for the jokes. Seen briefly in the background there is the late great Richard Lewis, who he's doing what he does best, and frankly, it works for a Mel Brooks movie. It's kind of a shame this was the only time you ever got to work with him. And then it's like he had one other film left after this. And again, this is one where it has its moments, but this overall is not one of his better offerings, which is a shame. Because hearing him talk about it, this wasn't just him going, okay, throw the jokes at the wall. Like they actually put thought into what kind of a Dracula's riffs they wanted to make. They actually did think this through. It just again, the movie doesn't really have enough of an engine. Like you can see the classic Dracula beats, but the movie just doesn't really tie together. Save for Peter McNichol, who this is the second time in his career where he's in a comedy where he's in at 11 and he doesn't need to be, and you almost feel bad for him because like you are doing a great job and it's better than this movie deserves right now. And unlike Men in Tights, which was decently reviewed and actually a box office hit, this was an honest to God critical and box office. People were not having it.
Yeah. I remember when it came out and thinking it looked funny and my parents were both like they're like, "Oh yeah, no, he made Young Frankenstein and Blazing Saddles," and they read the reviews and they're like, "Yeah, we're not going to see this." But they did then say like, "We'll let you watch Young Frankenstein."
Yeah, 'cause I mean, this was the first rewatching it for this program was the first time I'd seen it since I think first renting it way back in the day. It was kind of like there's a couple of chuckles, but yeah, it's just a lot of us kind of it's kind of after a while it starts doing a checking your watch movie. Which again, I feel ashamed because like this was his one time working with the late great Leslie Nielsen, where it's like had they had a better script, they probably could have done something really amazing, and it's just not there for this one. But it wasn't all. It's like even outside of his directorial work, Brooks stayed busy in film. He actually, in particular, he worked as like he did his own share of producing with his film studio, Brooks Films, which I particularly want to point out the two films on the left because these are not films people would expect Mel Brooks had any hand in, but he was a producer on both David Lynch's The Elephant Man and David Cronenberg's The Fly, and very specifically, he championed hard for David Lynch because the studios really were not sure if they wanted to work with this guy who at that point only had one kind of oddball midnight movie under the belt, and have him come in with this serious, somber, kind of dreamlike story about a physically deformed man in London. And Mel Brooks, very much, he was in Lynch's court the whole time, like, we've noted your suggestions. This is what we're doing. Deal with it.
It's kind of like not quite an inverse, but it reminds me of Martin Scorsese being like a low key horror booster. Like he'll be like, oh, what was it last year? He's just like, oh man, my daughter just had me watch. I saw the TV Glow. What a great movie! Like, heck yeah.
I mean, Brooks Films actually worked on several other projects. They also, one of their other standouts I didn't get the chance to fit on this slide, although I considered it, was the Peter O'Toole comedy My Favorite Year was another one of their wins.
Mm.
Upper right corner, this was one of the other times he got to work with Anne Bancroft, was they acted together in a remake of the Ernst Lubitsch classic To Be or Not to Be. I'll admit I have not actually seen this remake, although I've heard overall decent. I mean, the original is a phenomenal movie, but I have not checked out the remake. Lower right, I kind of had to point out because the movie Solar Babies is probably one of the most infamous moments in Brooks Film's career. Long story short, this was Brooks greenlit it as they figured it was going to be like a modestly priced film that was going to play like it was going to be a modestly priced little sci-fi movie. The kids would love it. The price ballooned. They had issues in filming. Without taking too much time, I think it's probably best summed up in a line by the critic Nathan Rabin, who put it as Mel Brooks didn't so much produce Solar Babies as Mel Brooks survived Solar Babies. The movie was a notorious flop, and he wound up bankrolling some of his out of his own pocket. As he jokes in his autobiography, that experience is what inspired the line in the producer's musical. One of the first rules of producing: never fund your own projects. Which actually kind of leads to the one of the biggest triumphs of his career after he got out of film production. No, there was to hear him tell it said sometime after Dracula, like during the late 90s, David Geffen was actually approaching him because he kept thinking he was trying to convince him, your movie, the producers could make a great stage musical. Brooks was honestly very skeptical at first, but Geffen was persistent. He kept kind of trying to persuade him on this. Finally, he convinced him to take a shot at it. And again, this is an idea they had been percolating for years. Like actually, the first director they had picked for it, unfortunately died in 1999, so they were kind of scrambling to get somebody else who could pick up the project. Which kind of shows you how long they had been working at this and going through several different iterations. And like before, it eventually there was the question of Brooks wanted to try and get somebody else to do the music on this, and getting told, you've got the skill for this. You don't need to hire somebody else. Get in there. The show finally opened in 2001 with, as we're seeing here, Nathan Lane and Matthew Broderick. And to say it was a hit is putting it mildly. When this first came out, it was a smash. It was like the big talked about show of the season. It's for a while there, it held the record for most nominations before getting outstreaked by Hamilton at the Tonys. But it still held on to its win as the most wins for into his career. The most Tony wins to date. 12 wins. No one's beat it yet. 20 years out. And well, it's like this actually wasn't his first musical. He had done one on way back in the day, which it's like I have to double check the name of it. It was not a. It's obviously it doesn't tend to come up as much. It was not as well known. And in the wake of this, he then went on to do a musical version of Young Frankenstein that likewise wasn't as big as. Okay, so the other one I was thinking of was he wrote a musical called All American that was back in the 60s. He had not touched a stage production in almost 40 years by the time they did The Producers. Following the wake of The Producers, they did workshop and work on a musical version of Young Frankenstein. It still makes the rounds. It's definitely not as big a hit. The first version of it actually opened to not great reviews, which was one where Brooks was initially discouraged, but he also kind of looked and went, the producers was kind of lightning in a jar. I can't expect it to be the result this twice in a row. So he kind of took it in stride and actually gave it some time, let it cool off. He went back, they kind of workshopped it a little, repurposed it, and the current version going around apparently, again, it's no producers, but it definitely is getting better reviews than the first version did.
Where are we on the film version of the Producers musical? Because I'm like, I put that as a BB minus.
I'd
It
say
helps,
so. It's one where,
it helps that we have Lane and Broderick.
although I will say, I feel like Broderick probably plays better on stage than he does on screen. Like, Lane is such an absolute dynamo on screen. Even the film version is like, he gets the perfect energy for that. Broderick, again, I'm sure probably plays a lot better on stage. On film, I'm just feeling like he's kind of feels a little too dialed down and in the shadow of Gene Wilder.
So where Broderick's kind of shines is when he's playing the character of Cooter Burger in 30 Rock, which is a similar wavelength. But that works when he's playing off of someone like Alec Baldwin. But yeah, you get swallowed on screen when it's Nathan Lane. Who, I
I,
mean, if you've seen Nathan Lane in The Birdcage, we all know, like, Nathan Lane manages to even almost overshadow Robin Williams, of all people.
Honestly, I think the biggest shock is I remember seeing the producers in theaters, and
John
there was
Barrowman's
one
in it.
there was one moment where Nathan Lane just his exasperated looking at the camera and just looking going, for a brief moment, I did a double take as like it was the spitting image of Zero Mostel. Which again, there's a reason he got the part. He has that perfect energy to play that role. And this is again, that's about where he's at now. It's like again, he's been working on things. He wrote the History of the World Part 2, and I just want to go on record as saying the title of this program was half tongue in cheek. I did not know at the time he did this that he actually did his memoir suggesting it's like that even where he goes from here, he jokingly referred to it as the History of Mel Brooks Part 2. So he's not ready to, it sounds like he's not ready to hang it up yet. So we'll see what he's still got going for him in the future.
Yeah. Just this man's an American treasure. Protect him at all cost.
Agreed. And now as we come to the end of the program, any questions, comments, etc.?
Well, Todd, what is your absolute favorite Mel Brooks film?
I feel like I have to give this to Blazing Saddles, although I will say the Gene Wilder trilogy, it is a very close race. I feel like it'd probably go Blazing Saddles, the producers, Young Frankenstein, although depending on who you ask, Young Frankenstein might lap the producers.
So much information. That was great. And so many films to add to the list. If
Oh yeah.
we all had, one day a week just to watch movies, wouldn't that be great? That's all you do.
I would say at minimum, again, seek out the three he did with Gene Wilder, the producers, Blazing Saddles, and Young Frankenstein.
Mhm.
All three certified.
I'm fascinated by the Anne Bancroft connection as well, just from my
Right.
parents' generation, knowing about her.
Oh, I remember when I brought that up to my mother because my mother's she watched his movies. I have to double check. I think she might have actually seen the producers with the original cast.
Wow.
I don't know how she got the tickets, but
Oh, yeah.
she used to go and see New York shows with her girlfriends. But when I mentioned, like, you do know she was married to Anne Bancroft for like 50 years, and she just said on the phone, she goes, "Yeah, Bancroft and him?
Yeah.
How did that work?"
Well,
And I'm
again,
like,
from all
she
reports,
probably,
yeah, they were like madly in love with each other. That
Yeah.
was
I'm like, she probably thought he was funny and charming, and it's like,
Right.
hey, why
Right.
not?
Cool.
So, couple of the programs we're doing next month, we are going to be talking about an actress where I tell people you've seen her, you may not know her name, but Joan Chen. She's been in Twin Peaks. She was in the Last Emperor. She's kind of having a little comeback. with The Wedding Banquet and Dee Dee, although I would argue Joan Chen never went away. She's just one of those actors that has been steadily working. And actors, performers like that, I actually find really interesting because it's like, yeah, they're able to fly under the radar enough to where they could probably travel and people won't bother them, but they're also like, every time you see them in a trailer, it's like, oh, look at them again.
Mm-hmm.
And then in October, Todd and I are teaming up to cover someone we've talked about a lot. We should probably just eventually cover him. And that's David Cronenberg, the father of body horror.
Which was actually one of the names I batted around, was like, it didn't feel right to do that one solo.
Yeah. October is good for that.
Yeah,
Oh, yeah.
he's and also like to celebrate one of his other films, long awaited, joining the Criterion Collection, History of, I believe that is an October release too.
It is. It's
Yeah.
You're getting that and Ken Russell in the same month. It's got to be a wild ride.
Now, if only I can get The Devils and Children of Men. We should probably just do a program on the Criterion Collection, but I should say in November, Todd and I and Ellie is coming back as well. We are finally pulling the trigger on doing Nicolas Cage November. As of right
The
now,
man,
we're
the myth, the legend.
we're trying to figure out how to make this program not be 3 hours long.
Yeah.
Especially because I need to drive down to Massachusetts that night because I'm going to New York the next day.
Oh, geez, that's right.
Oh.
And I'm going to be coming off the closing
Choices.
weekend. I mean, Liz, if it helps, I'm going to be coming to that one off the closing weekend of the Crucible. So we're both going to be kind of coming at this from different ends of what have we done with our lives.
We're going to be very busy.
The other thing that's so frustrating is that every time I see you, another month has passed. It's so scary that how could it possibly be we're talking about September already?
I know. I'm like, no, I don't accept this. Also, just a little quick programming note. So the Joan Chen program is not going to be the second Monday of September. I am going to be out of town that day. I'm going to be traveling back from Connecticut. So it's actually going to be the third Monday of September.
Okay. All right. That's after Dairy Fest then, right? I bet the 22nd.
No, I think it's going to be the 15th we're doing it.
Okay, that would make sense.
The 15th.
Yeah.
Camp John Waters is the weekend before, and I've done a program the night I've come back from that before, and I'm like, never again. I'm too tired.
Yeah, that was exhausting.
No,
so we have to drive back 3.5 hours, and this time one of our friends is coming with us, so we're gonna have to make sure they like get on a bus as well. So it's like, nope, I'm gonna be tired.
Yep, that's good planning.
Indeed.
All right, but we will see you next month with Joan Chen.
Definitely. Thank you so much.
Have a
Talk
good
to you
night.
later. Bye-bye.